Have you ever stopped to think about why some people, despite spending their entire lives sacrificing and working hard for their families, find themselves neglected in their later years? Why is it that, when the elderly need help the most, certain family dynamics seem to crumble under the weight of responsibility? If you believe that being a good child or a supportive partner automatically ensures you'll be cared for in your golden years, it's time to reevaluate that assumption. In this discussion, we're diving into the harsh realities of how families sometimes treat their elderly members, particularly when they become vulnerable and dependent. Together, we'll uncover the 3 types of people who often treat the elderly the cruelest, and more importantly, explore why these behaviors are often rooted in deep-seated patterns, life experiences, and even karmic consequences. These insights might make you question your relationships and the role you want to play as you or your loved ones age. By the time we finish, you'll have a better understanding of how unbalanced family roles and unresolved dynamics can lead to outcomes that no one wants. You'll see why good intentions alone often fall short and why seniors must choose carefully whom they rely on. Some people, despite their outward appearances, may become liabilities instead of support systems during life's later stages. This is more than just a thought exercise. It's a wake-up call for anyone who wants to avoid being taken for granted, or worse, outright neglected when they grow older. These are lessons that every adult, young or old, should hear. They're not easy truths, but they're essential for anyone who values independence, dignity, and peace of mind as they navigate the complexities of aging and family responsibility. So, if you're ready to gain some life-changing insights and reflect on the dynamics that shape our lives as we grow older, stick with me. This isn't just another video. It's a chance to learn, grow, and prepare for a future that honors your worth. Oh, and before we jump in, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any of our discussions. Your support means so much to me, and if this video resonates with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could like it and share it with others. Together, we can spread these important lessons and start meaningful conversations about the realities of aging and family. First, let me share a profound story where family conflicts are laid bare. Let me share a story that lays bare the complexities of family conflicts, especially when it comes to caring for elderly parents. David, my husband, declared one day that his mother, Margaret, would come to live with us in her old age. He assured me she'd bring her living expenses, so it wouldn't be a burden. But the reality of her financial situation became clear when I saw the details of her modest pension. It wasn't long before I reached my breaking point. I packed my bags and left for our daughter Jennifer's house. David, unable to reach me on my phone, quickly figured out where I'd gone. Naturally, he assumed I had nowhere else to go but Jennifer's place. He called her, speaking as if he was the injured party, and said, "Jennifer, tell your mother to stop causing trouble and come home already. The house is in shambles. How can I manage on my own? A child must honor and care for their parents, not run away when times get hard. Is she teaching you to abandon us in our old age too?" He was practically shouting through the phone. I was standing next to Jennifer and could hear every word. Jennifer, always bold and direct, couldn't hold back. She replied, "Dad, Grandma is your mother. It's your responsibility to care for her, not Mom's. You've told Mom before that having Grandma around would just mean one more place at the table. So why is the house suddenly chaotic just because Mom isn't there? She's staying here with me for now, and she'll come home when she's ready. As for me, don't worry. I'll always take care of my mother in her old age." With that, Jennifer hung up the phone. David didn't call back. Instead, over the next few days, he began venting on social media. His posts were filled with phrases like, "Children who don't care for their parents will face karma," and "Husbands and wives are like birds in a forest. When hardship comes, they fly apart." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I've never once stopped him from being a good son to his mother. I've gone out of my way to support him in caring for Margaret. Yet here he was, painting himself as the victim of abandonment. The truth is, as a daughter-in-law, I have no obligation to care for my mother-in-law. That's David's responsibility. Margaret has always had a history of playing favorites, and David, unfortunately, was never one of them. His younger siblings received all her affection and attention, but David still chased after her approval, bending over backward for a kind word or a smile from her. It's baffling how someone who has been overlooked and treated unfairly for most of their life can remain so blindly loyal. But that's exactly who David is, a man determined to prove himself, even to those who have never truly valued him. Why did I marry a man so blindly devoted to his mother? It's not a question I've asked myself just once. It's crossed my mind countless times over the years. The answer, though, is simple. We didn't marry for love. Our union was arranged through a family friend, a so-called matchmaker. There wasn't much romance or courtship involved. On paper, David and I seemed like a good match. I didn't dislike him, and we came from similar social and economic backgrounds. So I went along with it, never anticipating how deeply his loyalty to his mother Margaret would shape our lives. Margaret's favoritism was never subtle, but it became glaringly obvious when she decided to divide her assets. After the youngest of David's brothers, Ethan, got married, Margaret announced that she would split her property among her 3 sons. At first, I didn't object. It's not uncommon for parents to divide their assets among their children. As the saying goes, when a tree grows tall, its branches spread. When children grow up, they move out. But the way she went about it left me stunned. Margaret handed the family home and all her savings to Ethan and her middle son, Ryan. And what about David, her eldest? She told him, "You're the oldest, and both you and Emma, me, are working. You don't need help like your brothers do." Not only did we receive nothing, but Margaret also saddled David with an old debt, a $5,000 hospital bill from his father's medical expenses that had remained unpaid for years. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Margaret had savings. Why didn't she use them to settle the debt? Why was she making David carry the burden alone? Even before our marriage, David had already paid off a significant $7,500 debt to his parents, using money he'd worked hard to earn. I didn't say anything about that. After all, it happened before we met. But this new debt? I couldn't stay silent. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Before I could even bring it up, David, in his usual self-sacrificing manner, readily agreed to take it on. I was speechless. It felt like Margaret had anticipated my reaction because she was quick to justify her decision. She said, "After this, I'll live with Ryan and Ethan. You and Emma won't have to take care of me. The house and the money are mine to give as I please." Her message was clear, and David, ever loyal, didn't question her decision. He even tried to convince me to let it go. I knew arguing would be pointless. Margaret had made up her mind, and David wouldn't challenge her. And so, the division of assets was finalized, with nothing left for us except a lingering sense of injustice. But that wasn't the end of it. Despite claiming she wouldn't rely on us, Margaret continued to accept living expenses from David and me. She rotated between Ryan's and Ethan's homes, staying 6 months at a time with each of them. Publicly, she painted a rosy picture of her golden years, telling everyone she was enjoying her retirement. Privately, though, she was contributing her money and effort to help Ryan and Ethan with their households. Meanwhile, David and I continued to send her money, share hospital bills when she got sick, and provide gifts for Christmas and other holidays. It was maddeningly unfair, but I felt powerless to change the situation. David, despite being overlooked and underappreciated, remained obliviously loyal to his mother. He'd say things like, "Since Mom doesn't ask us to take care of her, she's asking us out." I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. "David," I said one evening, "what about the monthly checks we send her? Doesn't that count as caring for her? Or the hospital bills we split? Or the Christmas and birthday gifts? Are those invisible?" He had no answer. Instead, he got defensive and said, "Ryan and Ethan are physically there for her. They help her day to day. It's only fair that we contribute more financially since we live farther away." I stared at him, incredulous. "David, can't you see that she's the one helping them? She cooks, she babysits, she cleans, she's taking care of them, not the other way around. Meanwhile, we're footing the bill and getting nothing in return. Don't volunteer us for burdens that aren't ours." David didn't respond. He sat in silence, as though he thought I was overreacting. At first, even I wondered if I was being unreasonable. But deep down, I knew the truth. Margaret's favoritism wasn't just an old wound, it was a pattern, one that David refused to acknowledge, even as it cost us both time and peace of mind. David had no real response to my frustration. Instead, he got defensive, his tone clipped as he said, "Emma, we don't live near Mom, so of course, we have to contribute more money than Ryan and Ethan. They're the ones taking care of her in person." I couldn't believe his logic. My glare was sharp as I shot back, "David, can't you see it's the other way around? Margaret is the one taking care of them, not the other way around. She's cooking, cleaning, and helping them raise their kids. She's even using her pension to make their lives easier. And don't forget, she's already told us she plans to rely on them, not us. So stop volunteering us to shoulder burdens that aren't ours." David fell silent, a rare moment of speechlessness. I could tell he thought I was exaggerating, perhaps even being paranoid. At first, I wondered if I was overreacting too. Was I just being overly protective of our time and finances? But as events unfolded, my suspicions proved correct. Margaret's favoritism wasn't just a minor annoyance, it was a glaring injustice. This became especially clear when Margaret had a serious accident. One afternoon, while hanging laundry on the balcony, she fell and suffered what was initially thought to be a minor fracture. But her condition worsened, her legs swelled, and she couldn't move. By the time Ryan and Ethan decided to take her to the hospital, it was too late. Half of her body had become paralyzed. When I heard about it, I asked why they hadn't taken her to the hospital immediately after the fall. Their wives, Lauren and Stephanie, casually responded, "Well, Margaret didn't say anything, so we didn't know it was serious." I couldn't help but inwardly scoff. Who would believe such a flimsy excuse? It was obvious they didn't want to spend money on medical care unless necessary. They likely assumed a minor fracture would heal on its own. And now, with her condition deteriorating, everyone was pretending ignorance, pointing fingers elsewhere. I wasn't about to argue on Margaret's behalf, though. She had made her choices, and this mess wasn't mine to clean up. The immediate question became, who would take care of her now that she was bedridden? For me, the answer was simple. It wasn't my responsibility. I stayed out of the discussions, convinced that Ryan and Ethan, her favorite sons, would step up. But then David blindsided me. One evening, he came home and announced, "I talked it over with Ryan and Ethan, and we've decided that Mom will come live with us. She'll bring her living expenses, so all you'll need to do is take care of her physical needs." I stared at him, utterly speechless. His words hung in the air, heavy with their implications. Margaret, who had openly chosen to rely on her other sons, was now being brought into our home. And I was expected to shoulder the burden of caring for her. Just like that? My mind raced with questions and frustration, but for once, I was at a loss for words. David, for all his flaws, begged me to consider his feelings. He reminded me of how kind and supportive he'd been to my parents over the years. I couldn't deny that. He had cared for my father during his hospital stay, even taking time off work to be there. Despite my grievances, I softened. After all, I was retired, and Margaret had a modest pension of about $300 a month. That amount should have been enough to cover her basic living expenses. I convinced myself that it wouldn't be too much effort to look after her, especially as a way to repay David for all the times he had stepped up for my family. But my willingness to compromise quickly turned to bitter disappointment. The situation became laughably absurd almost immediately. It didn't take long to see why Lauren and Stephanie, my sisters-in-law, were so eager to pass Margaret off to us. They didn't even argue about keeping her pension. They gladly let it go, so long as they didn't have to deal with the responsibility. Then the real arrangement came to light. Margaret's $300 monthly pension wasn't entirely hers to give. She handed $130 to David and me, just enough to cover some of her expenses. The rest? Margaret divided it evenly between Ryan and Ethan, giving each of them $85, just as she had done when she split her assets. It was as if she couldn't help but reward her favored sons, even while living under our roof. I confronted David, frustration bubbling over. "What do you mean by this?" I demanded. "Do you think I'm a fool? We're the ones taking care of your mother, yet she's sending money to your brothers while we're left to manage everything." David, as always, brushed aside my concerns. "Emma," he said with exasperation, "children who are truly filial don't calculate money like that. We must take care of Mom." I laughed coldly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't duty, it was exploitation, plain and simple. Margaret had manipulated the situation so skillfully that David couldn't see how unfair it was. I refused to play along any longer. Without another word, I packed my belongings and moved back to Jennifer's house. Jennifer, ever supportive and wise beyond her years, offered me some hard truths. "Mom," she said, "if Dad doesn't wake up this time, maybe it's time to think about a divorce. Let him fulfill his role as the perfect son if that's what he wants. But you shouldn't have to bear the brunt of this anymore." Her words echoed in my mind. How could someone be as blindly devoted as David? How could he not see the harm this was doing to our marriage? I knew Jennifer was right, but I wasn't ready to make such a final decision. Not yet. The cruel reality of being bedridden. This ordeal opened my eyes to a harsh truth. It's easy to make grand declarations about aging gracefully and not being a burden to anyone. But when you're bedridden, reliant on others for even the simplest tasks, those promises fall apart. No one can navigate old age entirely alone. Humans, for all their flaws, ultimately rely on other humans. There's a poignant line in a poem I once read, called "When the Elderly Fade Away." Despite autumn's changing bones, despite the hair turning gray, the essence of humanity remains the same. When the sideburns have gone white and the body is immobile, true feelings are laid bare. In the strain of long-term care, pretense fades. Politeness is replaced by raw emotion, and hidden resentments bubble to the surface. Masks come off, and conflicts that once simmered quietly explode into full view. In these moments, the people who treat the elderly most cruelly often reveal themselves. Below are the 3 types of people who tend to be the harshest when it comes to caring for the elderly. 1. Daughters-in-law who only side with their parents and dominate household decisions. In American households, as in many cultures, the role of a daughter-in-law often brings complex expectations, especially when it comes to caring for elderly in-laws. While a daughter-in-law may not have a legal obligation to look after her husband's parents, reality often paints a different picture. Marriage intertwines lives, and the decisions of one spouse inevitably affect the other. Whether they like it or not, daughters-in-law often find themselves drawn into the caregiving dynamic, especially in traditional setups where household responsibilities are divided along conventional lines. In many families, even today, men often remain the primary earners while women manage the home. This division can place daughters-in-law at the forefront of daily caregiving tasks, from coordinating children's school schedules to running the household and tending to elderly parents-in-law. The challenge arises when the daughter-in-law's focus is solely on her parents, leaving her husband caught in the middle, torn between his wife and his aging parents. There's an old saying, no one is closer than one's parents, and no one is nearer than one's spouse. In this dynamic, a husband often finds himself influenced by his wife's opinions, especially in private moments. He hears her side of the story, her frustrations, her priorities, and naturally, her perspective begins to weigh heavily on his decisions. If his wife isn't supportive of his efforts to care for his parents, he might distance himself from them, either out of deference to his spouse or to avoid conflict at home. The parents, meanwhile, find their influence diminished, their opinions carrying little weight now that their assets have been distributed and their son has a family of his own. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. When a daughter-in-law controls the family's finances, this power imbalance can become even more pronounced. She might subtly, or not so subtly, restrict her husband's ability to support his parents. Whether it's controlling his pocket money to the point where he can't afford something as small as a pack of cigarettes, or outright vetoing contributions to his parents' medical bills, her control can create an insurmountable barrier for his efforts to help. For the son, who is financially tied to his wife, trying to assist his parents can feel like an uphill battle. The situation worsens when the son's work requires frequent travel, leaving his wife to manage the household and, by extension, his parents. While some daughters-in-law rise to the occasion with compassion and care, others do the bare minimum, or less. Serving a meal might be considered an act of kindness, but helping an elderly in-law bathe, lift them from a chair, or ensure they get the medications they need may be entirely out of the question. For some, the elderly in-laws are seen as obstacles, their presence a source of irritation rather than an opportunity to build a bond. Quietly, they might wish for the in-laws to pass on quickly, imagining the freedom that would come with their absence. No more caregiving, no more demands, and more time to spend on personal pursuits, even something as trivial as a weekly card game with friends. This dynamic creates a painful tension within families. The elderly parents, who once nurtured their children, now find themselves dependent on a system where they are at the mercy of their daughter-in-law's willingness, or unwillingness, to care. Meanwhile, the son is left in a no-win situation, juggling loyalty to his parents with the need to keep peace in his marriage. It's a recipe for resentment, conflict, and, ultimately, neglect. In the end, a daughter-in-law who prioritizes only her own parents and dominates household decisions can inadvertently cause a rift that leaves elderly in-laws feeling sidelined, disrespected, and unsupported. It's a harsh reality that underscores the importance of balance, fairness, and communication in maintaining family harmony. 2. Daughters who were treated poorly in childhood and, after marrying, want nothing more to do with their parents. In many families, the seeds of resentment are sown early, often in childhood. For some daughters, their experiences growing up were marked by favoritism, neglect, or outright mistreatment. These daughters were made to feel less valued than their brothers, their worth reduced to their ability to support the family or sacrifice for their male siblings. Over time, these injustices leave deep emotional scars, and once these daughters marry and start families of their own, they often want nothing to do with their parents. The stories of these daughters are heartbreaking. Some were expected to yield to their brothers in all things, from education to basic opportunities. Parents might have insisted that their sons' needs were more important, often justifying their actions with statements like, "Your brother will carry on the family name," or "You'll just get married and leave anyway." In some cases, daughters were even kept from attending school because their education was deemed unnecessary, while resources were funneled into ensuring their brothers had every advantage. It gets worse. Some daughters were forced to bring home money from their jobs to help fund their brothers' weddings or start their businesses. Others had their marriages used as a financial transaction, with parents demanding hefty dowries from their future in-laws. These dowries sometimes left the son-in-law's family in heavy debt, with the daughter hoping, foolishly perhaps, that a portion of the money would be returned to her and her new household. It rarely was. Years of being marginalized and treated unfairly build a strong sense of bitterness. By the time these daughters leave home and start their own families, any warm feelings toward their parents have long since faded. While their parents are healthy and self-sufficient, these daughters may keep their distance, quietly nursing their wounds. But when those same parents age and become dependent, the tension reaches a breaking point. Suddenly, the parents, who once dismissed their daughters' needs, begin to call on them for support. They might say things like, "You're my own flesh and blood. You have to take care of me." They appeal to the daughter's sense of duty, hoping to guilt them into stepping in. Some even ask their daughters to bring them into their homes, expecting to live out their twilight years under their care. For many daughters, these requests reopen old wounds. Every phone call, every plea, is a reminder of a childhood spent being overlooked and undervalued. The pain resurfaces, making it nearly impossible to fulfill their parents' expectations. Rather than feeling compassion, these daughters feel anger and resentment. The more helpless and dependent the elderly parents become, the more the daughters distance themselves, unable or unwilling to reconcile with the people who caused them so much pain. It's not uncommon to see these scenarios unfold in families. Parents who were once harsh, dismissive, or unfair may find themselves alone in old age, facing the consequences of their actions. Their daughters, having built lives where they finally feel valued and respected, choose to protect their own emotional well-being rather than re-enter a toxic dynamic. This painful dynamic is a reminder that the bonds between parents and children must be nurtured with fairness, respect, and love from the beginning. When those bonds are broken early on, it's nearly impossible to repair them later, no matter how desperate the circumstances. 3. Sons who were spoiled from childhood become destructive and indifferent to their parents' well-being. One of the most heartbreaking realities some elderly parents face is the disappointment of raising a spoiled son who grows up to be destructive, selfish, and indifferent to their well-being. These sons, often coddled and overindulged in their formative years, develop a sense of entitlement that persists into adulthood. Rather than growing into responsible and dependable men, they fall into patterns of laziness, incompetence, or even outright harm to their families. Take the story of a man we'll call Chris. From a young age, Chris was his parents' golden child. They gave him everything he wanted, excused his mistakes, and shielded him from the consequences of his actions. This excessive pampering bred bad habits. By the time he was an adult, Chris had developed a gambling problem and a knack for manipulating others to get what he wanted. After marrying, Chris's wife once handed him $1,200 to cover his father's medical bills. Instead of admitting his father to the hospital, Chris gambled the money away and lied about it. His father didn't receive the care he needed, and Chris showed no remorse for his actions. But his behavior didn't stop there. On another occasion, Chris used the pretext of taking care of his father to gain access to $4,000 from his father's savings. Predictably, he squandered it all at the casino. When his actions came to light, it caused a massive public confrontation. His uncle, in-laws, wife, and even the neighbors got involved. Chris backed into a corner, finally admitted his mistakes on a local mediation program, and promised to change. But whether he'll follow through and become a better son remains uncertain. Even when sons like Chris express a desire to be filial, their ingrained laziness and incompetence often prevent them from fulfilling their promises. In many families, there's a harsh but telling saying, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks." Someone who has spent their life avoiding responsibility or prioritizing their vices over others' needs is unlikely to transform into a dependable caregiver overnight. For elderly parents, having a son like Chris is an ongoing source of pain and regret. They might count themselves lucky if he gets married and has a family of his own, but hoping he will step up to care for them in their later years is often a futile dream. Instead, they are left to watch him mistreat or neglect them, all while feeling helpless to change the situation. The tragedy of this dynamic lies in the heartbreak it brings to aging parents. They often reflect on their mistakes. Perhaps they were too lenient, or perhaps they gave too much without setting boundaries. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. A son who was once their pride and joy becomes their greatest source of disappointment. In these cases, elderly parents are forced to rely on other sources of support, whether it's other children, extended family, or outside resources. The son they hoped would be their pillar in old age has become a liability instead, leaving them to navigate their twilight years with heartache and regret. 4. Happiness in old age, a karmic result. The way we experience old age often reflects the choices we made earlier in life. When elderly individuals face neglect, disappointment, or mistreatment from their families, it's rarely the result of mere bad luck. More often, it's a form of karmic return, a consequence of how they lived, the relationships they nurtured or failed to nurture, and the foresight they exercised in preparing for their later years. Many people, while still healthy and active, fail to prioritize building strong family bonds or raising their children with the right values. Some focus solely on immediate goals, career, wealth, or personal ambition, without considering the long-term impact on their relationships or retirement plans. Others neglect to guide and educate their children properly, leaving them ill-equipped to handle adult responsibilities. Without a long-term vision, they inadvertently set themselves up for difficulty in old age. The pillars of a secure and happy old age. In life, achieving success, stability, and happiness, whether in youth or old age, requires balance. This balance can be broken down into 3 key factors. Favorable timing. This refers to societal and financial opportunities, like having access to pensions, retirement savings, or Social Security. Ensuring financial independence is crucial for avoiding over-reliance on family members in old age. Geographic convenience. Choosing the right place to live plays a significant role in quality of life. Proximity to hospitals, parks, public transportation, and a supportive community can greatly enhance comfort and accessibility as one grows older. Harmonious relationships. Maintaining strong, positive relationships with family and friends is essential. This involves more than just surface-level connections. It requires fostering mutual respect, treating others fairly, and resolving conflicts before they fester. Preparing for old age. From middle age onwards, people have the opportunity to lay the groundwork for a peaceful and dignified old age. A secure financial foundation, such as a pension or savings plan, is a vital first step. Being financially independent reduces the likelihood of becoming a burden to others and allows for choices about where and how to live. Equally important is raising children who are not only capable and self-sufficient but who also feel valued and respected. Encouraging their education, supporting their ambitions, and treating them fairly as adults are all steps toward building relationships that will endure into their later years. Parents who treat their children's spouses, whether sons-in-law or daughters-in-law, with kindness and respect are more likely to foster a positive emotional connection that lasts. When parents invest in these relationships, their children and grandchildren are more likely to step in willingly when care is needed. Love and respect that are nurtured over time don't require guilt or obligation to motivate care in old age. They become natural responses to a lifetime of mutual support. The karmic balance of old age. Life has a way of balancing the scales. Those who are arrogant, dismissive, or selfish in their youth often find themselves isolated and pitiful in old age, surrounded by the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, those who endure hardships, treat others with compassion, and make thoughtful decisions early on are more likely to reap the rewards later. Their investment in relationships, self-sufficiency, and community ensures that their later years are marked by peace and connection rather than loneliness and regret. The lesson is clear. Old age is not just something that happens to us, it is something we prepare for, consciously or unconsciously, throughout our lives. By making thoughtful choices now, we can create a future that reflects the care and intention we've put into our relationships, finances, and personal growth. 5. A sugarcane stalk can't be sweet at both ends. There's an old saying, a sugarcane stalk can't be sweet at both ends. It's a vivid metaphor for life, especially in the context of old age. If someone uses up all their happiness, goodwill, and fortune early in life without cultivating anything to sustain them later, there will be little left to rely on when they need it most. This truth becomes painfully clear when elderly individuals find themselves bedridden or entirely dependent on others. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Old age has a way of stripping away illusions and revealing people's true colors. When caregiving responsibilities arise, the actions or inactions of children and family members lay bare the dynamics that have existed for years. Those who were treated with love and kindness by the elderly but now refuse to care for them are often seen as ungrateful. To outsiders, their neglect might appear cold or selfish. In such cases, society might condemn their behavior or pressure them to step up and fulfill their obligations. But the story shifts when the roles are reversed, when the elderly individuals in question were the ones who caused pain or neglect earlier in life. If those same parents are dismissive, unfair, or abusive toward their children, society's judgment becomes more sympathetic to the children's choices. A child who was mistreated and now refuses to care for their parents is often seen not as ungrateful but as an agent of karmic justice. The karmic justice of neglect. For many families, these dynamics are rooted in years of unresolved grievances. Parents who fail to build positive relationships with their children often face the consequences of those actions later. A child who is consistently belittled or treated as second-class compared to siblings may grow up harboring deep resentment. As adults, these children may see no reason to go out of their way to care for parents who never showed them love or respect. This kind of karmic justice is particularly evident when the elderly become bedridden. Suddenly, the balance of power shifts. Parents who once held authority over their children find themselves dependent on them for survival. In these moments, the actions, or lack of action, of the children reflect years of accumulated feelings, both positive and negative. The children who were treated unfairly often feel no obligation to provide care, seeing it as a boundary rather than an act of revenge. They've chosen to protect themselves from the pain of re-engaging in a toxic dynamic. A bitter truth. This situation highlights a bitter but universal truth. Life's sweetness is rarely guaranteed to last from beginning to end. If an elderly person has failed to nurture meaningful relationships or have burned bridges with their loved ones, their later years may be marked by loneliness and regret. For those who gave freely of their kindness and love, even if they were imperfect, their relationships often yield support and care when they need it most. The stark reality is that old age doesn't just reveal the character of those around you, it also reflects the choices you made throughout your life. How you treated others, how you managed relationships, and whether you invested in your family and community all come back to you in one way or another. For those who find themselves without support in their later years, it's a harsh reckoning. It serves as a reminder that happiness and security in old age aren't accidental. They're the result of years of thoughtful action, compassion, and connection. As we come to the end of this video, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've explored. From the harsh realities of family dynamics in old age to the lessons on karma, relationships, and preparation for the future, these stories remind us that the choices we make today shape the way we'll live tomorrow. What have you learned from this discussion? Is there one insight that stood out to you? Perhaps it's the importance of nurturing harmonious relationships, securing financial independence, or treating your loved ones with fairness and respect. Whatever it is, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below with one thing you've learned and plan to bring into practice in your own life. Whether it's a change in perspective or an actionable step, your insights could inspire others in this community. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more thought-provoking discussions and life lessons. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue creating meaningful content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.